My name's Tanya Finchum. We're here with James Lovell for O State Stories. It's October the 20th, 2006. And we're at the foundation, OSU Foundation. And you want to say your name so we'll have your voice tested here and see if it's picking up?
My official name is James F. Lovell. I normally go by Jim.
And you're a class of?
Class of 56, 1956.
Okay. So you attended here 1952 through 56, nonstop, pretty much?
That's correct.
And you're from what part of Oklahoma?
I grew up in a small town south of Marshall, Oklahoma, called Lovell, Oklahoma. And the Lovell schools had to consolidate, and we went to high school at Marshall.
Okay.
High school.
And why did you pick OSU as your college of choice?
No member of my family had ever gone to college. In fact, a good number of them did not go through high school. In high school, a person who had gone to Oklahoma A&M College by the name of Raymond Bryson, who is still alive at 95 or 96, and I have dedicated myself to be as much as I could like him. And he suggested, based on his daughter observations of myself, that he might be worthy of being a college student. I knew there was no way in the world that I could go to college. We just didn't have the money or the background. Neither my mother or father had graduated from high school. They were reared during the Depression. He asked me one day after a football game if I might like to go and visit Oklahoma A&M College. And I thought that would be fun. And so we came over here in the fall of '51. And it was, great. He had graduated in agriculture with honors and was well known. He was a livestock oriented person and was pretty well known for his cattle. One of the stops we made was to go to the Dean of Agriculture's office, and he says, I don't think he will know me, but we knew each other when we were in college, and this fellow was the Dean of Agriculture. So he said, let me see if we can get in. So he went, and before he even had a chance to introduce himself, the Dean of Agriculture comes out of his office and says, hello, Raymond Bryson. And so he clarified to him that he thought he would be interested to see if there might be jobs as there were 20 or 30 years ago at the ag farms. And he said, well, we've really come a little bit late because there's probably pretty well now committed. But he said we could put your name on a waiting list because usually 5 to 10% of about 30 or 40 boys that you hire each year as freshmen do not show up. But I knew I'd be way down on the list, so I figured my chances were nil. So 1 week before high school was over, I got a telephone call and said there was a position open. I didn't ask where it was or what it was. Because I knew it was a chance. At that time, you had to sign a contract for 1 year to be there every day, unless they excused you. And my job, being a freshman, would be to take what was probably the poorest of the jobs, because when you're a sophomore, you move on up the line.
Right.
My job was to clean 10 hog experimental feeding pens and scrape all the manure each day and feed them each day and be sure they were healthy. And every Saturday, there were 3 of us. We then mixed all the feed for the entire swine farm. And during farrowing season, then you cut the teeth and castrate them, et cetera, et cetera. And at that time, they did not have water, running water down to the sow's pasture. And so the other 2 boys were responsible for watering them. And each evening then when they came back from school, they got a mule known as Judy and 3 or 4 big 50-gallon tanks, wooden tanks, and filled them up, and then took the buckets and went down and watered the pigs every day. In the summer, we had a little bit more free time, and it took more water, and they did that. And I, at that time, then cleaned the experimental dens, and that's the way we worked my way through school.
All 4 years, or just the
Just
your
that first year. And Dr. Jim Hillier, who was well known, was our advisor and came quite often. We 3 lived in a 1-room with no eating facilities, and we had 2 bunk beds, 2 double bunk beds, and the other one we kept threw our books on. So 2 of us lived upstairs and 2 of us, one of them lived downstairs, and we had a small sink. It was tough going to college. When I took English, the only thing they taught us was Shakespeare. I didn't even know that English meant writing. We'd never had any writing experience. So it was extremely tough, real tough. Thing I remember in reflection was on certain occasions, no matter how much you tried to clean up, there was probably a little odor from working at the swine barn. And every now and then people would look a little strange. And there wasn't much I could say or do, but you just went ahead. One point I want to make, though, about that first summer, I just certain it was the first summer, it could have been the second. I took classes on campus, of course, and the first summer they were building the OSU library.
I wanted to ask about that, so good.
And I was just marveled at it. I'd never seen anything like it. They had what were the equivalency of just little wheelbarrows, but instead of them having handles, they were motorized. And they contained just about as much cement as a wheelbarrow would occur. But you're building a big building, and the cement truck would come to the north side of the road just behind the library, and they would be lined up, 20 plus little motorized units. The first floor had already been paved without any big fanfare. But then they had wooden boards, probably 2-inch by 16 or 18 inches in 2 of them, so that the motorized concrete wagon could put up this as you went to the second floor. It was the days before what we have today, where you have these big long cranes that will go up 3 and 4 floors and just pump it in there. Mm-hmm. And they would go up like the entire width of the building. These planks were put up, and then they would have a circle and it'd come back up and weave back and forth to the second floor. Then when we went to the third floor, it went more. And all summer long, every day, even the noise, you just couldn't keep it all out. And so it just became, each time you met 3 days a week, well, you saw the progress that they made all summer. And I thought, my goodness, what a modern invention we're seeing. Nothing like it in the world. Motorized concrete wagons. And we thought, boy, this place is high tech. And then they put the water fountain in front and it bubbled and all that. And all the time we were there, there was not much mischief about dumping water in there, but later on I understood it got to like that. So that was my first year, and it was tough. And I grew up on a dairy farm, and my dad really wanted me to stay home and milk cows, and we milked about 40 cows. But when it came my senior year, they were to let me off for the 4 or 5 day senior trip. And he would find somebody. Even with 2 weeks to go, he said, I'll find somebody. But it got the day before, and he still hadn't found anybody. So I didn't get to go on the senior trip. And that day there, I made a vow that if I ever had a chance to go to college, I'm going to go. So that's what I did. He paid me $25 a month to go to help with expenses here. And it was tough. And when I came home for Thanksgiving, which would be 3 months, he said, I just can't afford it anymore. Well, I knew that he really could. He was just trying to get me to come back. And I said, well, I'll just find another job. And that's what I did. I found a job as a custodian. Worked. You could work any time from 5 to 8 o'clock in the morning, just have it cleaned, this whole thing. So I did that. And when I came back home for Christmas, though, he had decided that he could afford to buy a milking machine. So that's where we got off running, but that's strange. But Raymond Bryson helped me get a job on campus, and I'm going back to every reunion he's had. So I came and got here. In the first year, then I had a chance to go to the steer shed feeding, and all you had to do was to feed these steers hay and grain, and it could be done in less than an hour, and there's no manure to pick up. And so you were really a pretty clean-cut fellow by your sophomore year. And I like that. In the summer of '53, because it was a year-round job, a friend came up to me in class and said, I need to go on a double date with a young lady. She said that she doesn't know me that well, and so she'd like for a double date. Would you be interested? Well, I didn't have a car. It rained a lot on summer weekends, it seemed like. So I said, sure. And so I got a date. We went on this double date. When it was over, we went out to the park. And the park right down the way here. And had a nice chat and swang the swings and things like that. I said to myself, this guy's got a real quality lady here. I mean, a quality lady. So I thought, well, I'll just play it coy because I'm certain they're probably dating steady, but I never saw him with her. And so after about 3 weeks, I decided, well, and when I asked him how he just dates doing, he said, oh, I just date one girl at a time, maybe once, maximum twice, and just go on. I said, well, if you're not dating this girl, well, I said, I think I'll ask her out. So I call and find out that she would go out with me. But I also found out that she had come here as a freshman and was working at a telephone operating on campus, and she'd been monitoring my telephone calls. The good thing is, I was an honest fellow, so we started dating. And we oftentimes met in the library, because I didn't have a kid. It got real serious, and she was a valedictorian of her class, and I just graduated from my class. So we went from the fall of '53 to the spring of '54, and at that time, I had learned that there was, I was an ag major, that a lot of ag publicity came out from Oklahoma A&M through a person named Clay Potts. And he was a strong supporter for Oklahoma A&M, and he had these barbecue dinners all over the state. And I would say in that time there was probably no farmer or agricultural oriented person that wouldn't have known him. And he did pass away at a football game, where I'm certain that's what he would have wanted. The requirements were that you had to be a graduate student and you had to be married. I could hardly afford myself, let alone two. But I heard about it and I said I had nothing to lose, so we decided, well, we'll just keep dating, but if we could get this job, it gave us a 1 bedroom, 1 living room, 1 kitchen. And we would work out here on 6th Street at the it's called this. It was a Botech Center now. In those days, it was called the Oklahoma A&M College Short Course Center, where they had a lot of meetings, and they had 3 or 4 large halls, and they needed somebody to clean it up in the evenings, and maybe another part of the meeting would be the following morning. And that was your responsibility, was to keep those 3 buildings, rooms clean. So I asked for an interview, and he said, well, you can come, but he says, I've never hired anybody but a graduate student. Just don't hire them. I just got to have them in the building. So I said, well, I'd like a shot if you're receptive. So he said, come in. Okay, we go in. Sit down. And the interview went well. I thought, you know, he's just being courteous. I understand. But then as we got ready to leave, he turned and he said, I want you to know one thing. your fiance's hair is exactly the same color as my fiance's hair was when I first met her. So we left her thinking, well, there might be an outside chance. And in less than a week, he calls and says, if you can be married by June 1st, the job's yours. But you have to be married. And that's what we're waiting for. So we got married at home church, came back to school. We both graduated in '56. I was on the Air Force drill team. I then, the sophomore year, a good friend of mine from high school was a farmhouse member. I knew what a farmhouse stood for, so I tried to apply and work out of the house. And I worked then at the building directly west of the library, a wooden building called the State Tech Center, or the WAG Center. It was a white wooden building right along the street there. And just a little bit to the west and north of Whitehurst Hall at that time. And my job was, and the guy's name was Perky, Mr. Perky, and a man of great power and influence. And he interviewed several, and he laughed and said, all right, I'll tell you, this job's yours on the following basis. Sometime between 5 p.m. and 8 a.m. every day, you come in here, you sweep the floors, empty every waste paper basket, and I want that water fountain sparkling. And then one weekend a month, you come in here and wax the floors. And we did that. And it worked out great. And that's what I did as an additional job. So we get married and live out there. And he was kind. Whenever there was a meal, if there's any food left over, well, he just put it in our little refrigerator, whatever it was. So he was almost like a father to you in a way. I get an advanced ROTC. Thought that's where I would be. And I go off to summer camp, and I get a choice place to go. But in the trial runs, they find that I am colorblind to about 3 or 4 colors out of the 100. Or maybe 7, you couldn't mess over 3. What I remember was that you had a real famous halfback here at A&M at that time, and he was quite good, but when he went out on passes, he sometimes dropped them or didn't quite get them. Well, he was an Air Force ROTC, and we go to Advanced Air Base for our inspection, and he learns that he's slightly cross-eyed. And that's the reason he was missing his passes. They never caught him. So they worked on that technique, and the next year he became a highly successful halfback. But in my case, they said you can only miss 4. Now, the commandant was a tough guy. He said the only way you can not have to take these tests is you have to have a 3.5 average or be an engineering major. Well, I was neither. So then he gently pulled out of his drawer a little pad that had all the 100 colors. He says, it just so happens I have one of these. He says, you're a good student. He said, I've got 7 of them marked. He said, you might want to study, go take the test. But we were married, and we came home and talked about it, and we last decided if those colors were that important, someday I would run into those colors. And so we decided we probably wouldn't do it, but we enjoyed it. I would then say that I'd like for the world to know there were some great teachers here. One of them was a Mr. Johnson in chemistry. Chemistry is a tough course, but he made it interesting. And class would have 100, 150 in it, but oh, he was a teacher that really you could learn. Another was a Dr. Ducker who came from Texas, and he became a guiding light. I became an officer in the Ag Ed Club, and he was a major influence in my life. There was a Dr. Reed in soils, and he was an excellent teacher. There were others, but Mr. Clay Potts was well known, and count on whatever he said. Let's see what else. In the sophomore year, I pledged Farmhouse. And it was a great experience. Honorable young men, clean cut, and we still see each other some to this day. The following spring then, I was made a member. And for some reason, I was chosen as the social chairman. I could never figure that out. I did know a few ladies. We get married. She's majoring in home ec. She makes straight A's. Has all kinds of awards. We then decide that our parents both tell us that you're going to have to make it on your own. We will not provide you any money. I understood. I thought maybe they might give a little. I knew Dad wouldn't, and I knew her dad might, but when it came to it, he said, now, Jim, there's one thing. You're on your own. About 6 weeks after we were married, we decided we'd drive here back to Weatherford. And we suddenly realized that in those days, not many of the service stations were open on Sunday. And when I got there, I didn't have enough gas to get back. So I humbly asked him if I could obtain some gasoline. So we go down to the farm gas pump, we pump in 5 gallons. And he turns to me and says, that'll be $1.25. And so I came up with $1.25, but I never forgot to fill up when I was in Stillwater before I went. But he was a great man, a great teacher. And those are just some of the funny highlights. I enjoyed my Air Force ROTC. I really thought I'd be a jet pilot. And even had a chance to fly some jets while I was there. But it didn't turn out. So we come back and we decide we'll both go out and practice teaching at the same time. They had assignment to us at Fairview. We went there and we taught. I taught under Claxton Cook, who later comes to Oklahoma A&M as a professor, stays here many years. And he taught me 2 or 3 little simple things. And he says is, when you're young, you're like a little duck. You don't want to be in a big pond. You want to be in a small pond and learn the ropes. So I took that to heart. But before our practice teaching finished, the lag teacher took a job in Texas. And so there was an opening in the panhandle of Oklahoma. And so they were desperate for people to look into it. And I knew Western Oklahoma has honorable people because she lived there and I'd been there. So I go out there and interview at a town called Hardesty. It's just about 15 miles east of Guyana. And Panhandle State's there. So I go out there and interview, and they said to any one of these 5 that had made application that this would be your second 8 weeks of teaching supervision, except you do the teaching, and we'll come and see you, and that's what it was. So I finished that. And so Jan goes to Panhandle State the second semester, and then comes back in the summer and finishes up. All's going well. But at the end of the second year there, we learned that in our home county of Logan County, Oklahoma, Guthrie, that in those days they had drafts and numbers. And there were 3 members on the draft board, and those 3 fellows had sons, and the FBI came in and charged them with falsification where their sons would not have to go into the service. Federal judge's report was every person born in this county of Logan County would have to go into the service. My entire school board came down on my behalf trying to keep me there. But he says, this is a federal ruling and I can't, so I had to go off to the service. So I did that, but in some ways it was probably a blessing. When we finished, we had saved all of her money, which was $2,400 a year. And we decided to go back to graduate school. And I decided that I have a love for the environment, and so I went back and majored in ecology, and we went to K-State. Took her money for the down payment and went there. And we had 1 child while I was in the service. well, actually just before we went into the service. And we have 3 other children. We came back and went to K-State, and I majored in ecology. In those days we said ecology. When people ask, I said it's ecology spelled with 1 L and pollution spelled with 2. And that's the way we sort of told it. If it's 1 L, it's good. If it's 2 L's, it's hell. So it was a great experience. I worked under a great person. You may not know it, but the Kanza Prairie, which is now a national grassland reserve in the Flint Hills, was under the supervision of my graduate advisor. And he was a Quaker, and he taught me a lot about Quakers and what they do. I go on and on, but we gave birth to a son, Ralph, and then later a son, Randall, and then later a daughter, Rhonda, and then a daughter, Diane. I never once tried to influence my sons, but both of them decided to come to Oklahoma State. Both of them went through Farmhouse. Both of them were top 10 students in the yearbook. One now is a toxicologist and works for the federal government and is in charge primarily for the mad cow disease in this country. And so we're proud of him, but we're proud of them all. Our daughter is a lawyer, and our other daughter is a history professor at Houston Baptist College, University. So we feel that we've been very fortunate. Just a humble beginning. I never dreamed in my wildest dream that any of this would happen. But Farmhouse was a big part of it. Oh, and I worked on my master's degree while I was in the Panhandle. And Robert Price was the head of the Ag Ed department. And he's passed away, but his record is almost untouchable. And he was my advisor and came out and provided me words of encouragement during those days. And I owe a lot to him. A very fine person. That's probably the highlights. Dr. Duggar eventually left his position here at Ag Ed and went with Senator Kerr and was on his staff. And he made a lot of decisions which related to the Houston, what do you call it, Aerospace Center. And he was a major influence. What I learned later was he had married a friend of President Johnson's. And Roy, having grown up in that area with a peanut farmer, it helped. But he was a gentleman. So a lot of fine people were here. That's probably the highlights of what I recall. Farmhouse was a big influence for me. Stand right now, thank you for there.
Do they decorate it back then too for during homecoming? Did Farmhouse do decorations?
Yes, and I know we won one of the 2 years, and our song was "This Old House." Was it? This old house ain't got no. Probably before your times. It was a hit song then, and so we did that. This old house. This old house ain't got no windows. This old house ain't got no doors. That's what I remember. But we participated every year that I was there, and before they had always been first in academics. And there were some real sharp kids there, but it was just an unbelievable experience to be here.
Student Union was being built at about the same time as the library too. They had
Right.
the fancy wheelbarrows doing that too.
I remember that. That brings up a fine point. I'd never done anything but square dancing in our small town. So I come over here, and you're lonely, and you hardly know anybody in summer school. You're just out here sort of on your own. So I go up to the student union, and they had that little third floor dance. I learned a jitterbug. I was good at it for about a year, but then without practice, it sort of went away. But I wrote back to my mother. My mother and father, of course, were separated, and told her I was jitterbugging, and then I added to the bottom of it. It says, "Mother, I did this because whenever you're real happy, you do the Charleston. My mother could do the Charleston. And she was a fine lady and a wonderful person. So I never dreamed in my wildest dream that I could get a college degree at that time. No one had ever done it. You come from a poor family. You have no basis from which to orient. But Raymond Bryson gave you that chance.
So it's just a life-altering point in your life, and that's connected with OSU or OAMC.
So after I retired, I identified 5 people who were very inspirational in my life. And I wrote each of them a letter. And I visited with each of them. Because I wanted them to know.
It was called OAMC.
OAMC. And I still have my freshman beanie.
Oh, I saw that in the yearbook, and someone said, no, they didn't have those. Yes, they did.
I still have my freshman beanie.
Did you have one too?
I did not have a.
You didn't have a beanie?
Jan was a little more redheaded, and when you got out in the sun at the football games, and we always sat on the north side, so you got a lot of sun, she would freckle a little bit, so we had to get a little shade screens that we put over a couple of those games. But
Were there any other homecoming traditions that you remember that they're still doing today? Was walk around? Did they have walk around?
I don't remember the walk-arounds they might have, but I know the fraternities and sororities were quite involved, and Farmhouse was on the north side by itself, but the sororities were very supportive of Farmhouse. We had almost no drinking at all. There were 1 or 2, and they would be somewhat discussed, encouraged, or given assignments. If it got real bad, we'd take them on what we called a walk, take them out somewhere 20 or 25 miles, blindfolded them until they get home. And one of those guys I'll meet again tonight. But there was a little bit, but not near what I saw elsewhere. But Raymond provided my exposure to the college. And I wasn't certain that I could make it. But when we ran tests, it showed that I really had potential. I just hadn't been encouraged. But my mother was a very fine lady. When my dad and mother separated, she had no choice but to look for work, and World War II had broken out. And so she left for a day or 2, and we didn't think anything about it. She comes back home and says, we're going to a bigger town in Kansas called Wichita. And she goes, and she becomes one of the 300 women that were hired each week during that time to build the B-24s. And she'd been there about, everyone has an entrance test, and 2 to 3 weeks later, she gets a notification to come to the office, and she thought she probably was to be fired. She probably hadn't done well. She did not graduate from high school, but during that class of 300, she was in the top 30. And they asked me if she would be interested in being trained as a blueprint supervisor. And it says you would supervise their wiring, the electricity in each of these planes. And then your stamp of approval will go on there. And what it would mean is you take 6 weeks of training, and we'll give you 50 cents more an hour. She says, I don't care what it is, at 50 cents more an hour, I'm ready. And I still have her shoulder badge, and we're building a museum at Weatherford, and that will be on display.
So how long did she work there then?
She worked there during the entire war, and then married a soldier who had come back.
She was a true Rosie the Riveter.
True Rosie the Riveter, and she was quite proud of it.
That sounds like you came from good stock.
I did come from good stock. Jan comes from tremendous stock.
And you're passing it on.
We sure hope so. We'll kiddingly say that our second son is a toxicologist, a PhD toxicologist in veterinary medicine. There's only less than 50 of them in the country. That's one reason he was hired to be the in charge of the mad cow disease. He has 4 children. They're in a high school of about 700. The 2 oldest girls of his are both top of the class, and their son, their first son, is now a senior class president, will probably be #1 in the class.
Potentially come to OSU?
I think they're probably not, because they've been in West Virginia for so long. A year ago, this last Christmas, they have that basketball classic. OSU plays a team and OU plays a team. Well, OU played West Virginia, so that entire group came here to play. In the first 5 or 6 minutes, OU was leading 13-7. Before the next 5 minutes was over, West Virginia was slightly in the lead. And that was OU's first loss, and I mean, you talk about big-time victory. We cheered for 2 reasons. One, that OU got beat, and secondly, that West Virginia won. But I don't think we'll get them out of West Virginia.
Well, maybe 1 out of the 4.
But they, at least 2 of the 4 will go on to graduate school, I'm sure. But, you know, it's just one of those things. Our oldest son has 2 children, and the oldest girl is a freshman on the Texas Tech University soccer team. So that's sort of where we are. And our daughter has 2 daughters, and they're both in college. And our youngest one has 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl, and she's married to a very successful lawyer in Houston. So, my wildest dream, I couldn't have written a story like this, but Raymond Bryson was the catalyst, and he was from OAMC. And he said, let's give it a try. I would never have been here otherwise. That's just life. So when I saw that email, Jan encouraged me to come.
Well, we appreciate it. We sure appreciate it.
Awesome.
Well, Clay Potts was a big factor, helped us.
His name has come up
Several times.
Today already, so we'll have to go back and figure out who he
I've heard
is.
of
There were
Clay.
2 other
Good.
professors in animal husbandry, Dr. Tadashak. I tried out for the junior livestock team, never having been on a judging team, but I knew I was fairly good. The only thing that kept me alive in the junior year was, even though I never judged horses, I always beat everybody on horses, but then the sheep and the cattle and stuff, I was way, way off. But he was a great teacher. And then there was a Dr. Nelson who went to New Mexico State as their chair, and a Dr. Pope who went from here to Texas A&M and B. They were all great teachers, very, very, very fine teachers. But chemistry I thought would be a problem, but Dr. Johnson is just, he can teach it like, if you'll study, it's there, and sure enough it would be. So that's just.
And you
You know.
still have time to do the jitterbug once in a while.
But, now, I mean, my start is the result of having a chance to come here. In those days, one of the thought, that guy asked me if this double date, maybe 1 out of every 4 or 5 male students would have a car. If a woman had a car, it meant one thing. She's either real wild or her parents have money, because there weren't many girls that had cars. And I mean today, if you don't have at least 1 car, you're a nobody. If you don't have 2 cell phones, you're a nobody. In those days, we didn't have cell phones, but I've been at a few of these college conventions that are in the student union. They go up and down that hall, and every other one is talking to somebody. So the world has really changed, and the computer's great. I appreciate your time and listening. I thought we were going to just talk about OSU, but I appreciate the honor to do this other.
Well, it's great. We appreciate it too.
These are your stories. These are your own stories.
We do it partly because it's something we pass on to kids, grandkids, and grandkids.